Okay, I'm going to show you how I pleat a ring sling. This is Jan from Baby Productions. I've had text directions up on my website for a long time. Haven't done a video because it's a little above my job description, but I figure it's probably time. So I've hemmed my piece of fabric. I use a 1/2-inch hemming foot. This is actually something that my sewing machine dealer put together for me. It's for an industrial machine, but my machine has a place I can screw in the special foot and stuff like that. This is not something you're going to find at Joann's. The widest foot that they have there is going to be a 1/4 inch, which makes a pretty small hem for a sling. If your machine doesn't have a 1/2-inch hemming foot, and most of them will not, you can just fold as you sew. I never iron. Even if I'm doing it without the hemming foot, I just fold as I go. So anyway, you want to hem 3 sides of your piece of fabric. And then to do basic pleats on this kind of fabric, this is linen, it's about 27 inches wide, so I'm going to do the pleats a little bit smaller than I would on a wider fabric. First I'm going to fold up about 2 inches, so you can see, well, I guess it's a little bit shy of 2 inches, maybe 1.5, because it's a fairly narrow fabric, from the fold to the end of the fabric. And then you can kind of see, I don't know if you can see it in the video, but the fabric itself has warp and weft lines. Those are the, warp is the direction going this way, weft is the direction going this way. I kind of fold along one of those warp lines, and then I'll pull it back. And I'm leaving that hem out of the fold because I think it makes a nice edge finish when it's done. And then I'm going to pin once, about 1/2 inch from the edge. And then again, here's my edge, about 5 inches down from that. I sew right over my pins. I know you're not technically supposed to do that. My machine's pretty good, so I do. If you don't want to sew over your pins, you can pin everything and then take a couple of strips of masking tape and use that to keep your pleats in place, and just like go to one side with the masking tape after your pins, so that you can kind of use the tape as a guide as you sew. So my next pleat, here's the edge of my, here's the edge of my first one, and I'm going to grab about 3 inches from that. You can go maybe 3.5. This is all kind of eyeballed. I don't have like a ruler that I use when I'm usually doing it, because I've done so many, it's kind of second nature. But again, I'm going to pin in the same place. I'm going to pinch that next pleat, pull it down, pin, pin, pinch, pull it down, pin, pin, and you can see on the back so far, it's maybe a little messy there, but that's the part that's not seen, so we don't worry about that. Unless you're trying to make something reversible, in which case, I don't know if I'd use pleats anyway. I think I would use something else for a reversible shoulder. So I'm getting close towards the end. Pin those in. And so when I do the last one, this is sort of more of a cosmetic step. I'm going to take that about 3 inches there, pull it down, and you can see I've got a pretty wide bit of fabric left over there. I'm just going to sort of fold that. You can see where my fold line is there. If I crease it, it doesn't end up being the full width, but it's nice and symmetrical with the one that we left down here. So I'll do that, show you that as soon as I've pinned that in place. You can probably see I've got the same width here as I have over here, and I think that's a nice look. So now I'm going to sew them in. Let's see if I can move this. And I just go right over those pins. Don't do that if your machine is not a decent machine, because sometimes it does go right on the pin and then it punches into the pin, and that's not so good. I don't know if you saw what I just did there. Maybe not, because this light is so bright and I can't get it quite far enough over, but this is the normal tension setting. It's about a 4. I bring that down to about a 1.5 or 2, and that makes the basting stitch. It's a lot easier to pull that out once you're done sewing. So, and I'm using a very wide stitch here. This is the rather a long stitch. This is the longest stitch on my machine. Again, that makes the basting stitches easier to pull out. So I'm going to pull out my pins. And then the next thing I'm going to do is a wide zigzag stitch don't know if I can show that. I've got this hooked onto my light, so, well, you'll see it once I actually sew. And because this is one that I'm going to sell, I've got to write a tag for it too. This is obviously not something you're going to do if you're making one for your own use, but if you are selling slings, you absolutely have to have some kind of tracking information on your sling. Now, if you're selling slings from my method, I don't like that so much. I think you should create your own, because there are already a zillion pleated slings on the market because a lot of people copy each other. Pleats are great, but there are dozens of ways to sew a sling, so be creative. Do something on your own. So here, I'm just going to do this zigzag. This finishes the raw edge. And I like zigzags rather than folding under because it makes for a nice smooth edge. Once you've sewn in the rings, you don't have a big lump under the rings on your shoulder. If there's any uneven bits, just kind of trim those off where the zigzags end. I gotta go grab some rings, be like that. Probably should have had those on me, but that's how I work. So now I've switched the stitch on my machine to one that does an automatic backtack. Some machines have that, some don't. Generally the better machines will. If you have like a home machine from Walmart or another sewing center, it's going to be pretty basic. Then you'll have to reverse as you sew, but you'll see this machine does it for me. So what I don't know if you can see what I'm doing. I'm lining up the edge of my zigzag with the basting stitch that I did. Hopefully that shows up. This light is pretty bright. And then I'm just gonna stitch right along that edge. And I'm sort of curving this as I go. I think that's a nice look when it's done. Take this part slowly, especially if you're using a thick fabric, because the thicker the fabric is, the harder time your machine is gonna have going through it. So there's that little back tack. And then I'm going to pull out those basting stitches. This is where the wide, loose stitch is nice because that basting stitch will just come right out. And this is sort of an individual thing too. I like to kind of narrow the pleats in the rings before I go on to the next step. So I'm just going to take this pleat, pull it over that one, take this one and pull it over until they're all about the same width where it's folded through for the rings. So that's pretty washed out, but I hope you can see that. And then I'm going to sew again about 1/2 inch from that first seam. And because of the way that I've just spread that fabric, or pulled the fabric in, it makes a nice curve. So there's that one. And then this is my own personal decorative touch. I will know you copied if you do this too. I sew about, well, I guess a little bit less than 1/4 inch again from that first seam. So now I've got 3 lines of straight stitching. That by itself is going to be enough to hold the rings in place for a very, very long time. However, I also like to do a nice decorative stitch and just give it a little more interest. So this thread matches the ring color that I'm using, which is slate. So I'm going to thread the machine for that. And then between the second and third lines of stitching, I'm going to do a decorative stitch. I recommend no fewer than 3 lines of stitching, preferably 4. And this decorative stitching effectively does 3 lines in the pattern, so these rings are not going to come out. And my machine ties it off automatically. I love this machine. This is a Janome 6600. So then I'm just going to very carefully trim my stitches. Occasionally when I'm trimming, I do catch the edge with my scissors, and then I'll just go over that with a very narrow, tight zigzag, make it look like a design element, just to kind of hide the mistake that I made. So there are the finished pleats, and there's lots of videos on using a sling, so I won't do that here, but I hope that was helpful. Thanks.